And we are back for episode 4.4. Our episode begins with Missandei giving Grey Worm a language lesson. This is the beginning of the Missandei-Grey Worm relationship, which the show has introduced in order to get the audience to care a bit more about Slaver's Bay. In the book, there is no relationship. Missandei is only about 10 or 11, though she very well may be lying about her age. She's way too smart to be 10 or 11. Now, many readers did find Slaver's Bay a tough story to get into, which may explain why this romance was introduced for the show. The book has a whole slew of foreign characters in order to play on humanity's tendency to villainize the other. But perhaps our author was a little too effective. Talking to casuals, few even remember the difference between characters like Skahaz and Krasni's and Hizdar and Reznak and Yezin. They all became Harzu. Now here the show focuses on blossoming in love before the onslaught of death, and the book does actually have a similar juxtaposition. In the book, Dany hears about Missandei's life on her home island of Nath. It's a beautiful place where the populace lives in balance with nature. However, it's also a place where invaders die of disease. And of course, we should remember that Dany is the invader of Meereen. Next we have the taking of Meereen. Now in the book, this invasion is quite a bit different. So back at Yunkai, Dany had turned two sellsword companies, the Second Sons and the Stormcrows. The show has merged these two companies, but in the book, Dany has two commanders to deal with, Daario and a man named Brown Ben Plum. Brown Ben is a suspicious man who is descended from a number of people from around the world, including Targaryens, and for perhaps this reason, Dany's dragons love him. Now when Dany's crew comes to Meereen, which has walls that are intimidating, Jorah recommends they keep marching, but Brown Ben Plum recommends they use the sewers. Now this whole invasion in the book is kind of one big dirty rape metaphor. You see, Dany tears apart her ships and makes a battering ram that everyone names Jozo's Cock, and it slams against the gates while Dany's other forces penetrate through the city's sewers. That's right, Meereen got fucked in the ass. Now here in the show, the slaves are all hanging out in this room for some reason, and are not fighters. But in the book, Jorah, Barristan, and Strong Belwas go to the fighting pits and free the fighting slaves. It's these trained fighters who really take the city before Dany's forces finally break in. Now here in the show, the city looks pretty clean and happy, but in the book there are piles and piles of dead bodies, along with a bunch of rioting and pillaging. Dany castrates and dehands plenty of men. Now in both book and show, Dany orders the death of 163 leaders as justice for the killing of 163 slave children. Here in the show, though, Barristan recommends against this action and wants her to have mercy on them. Barristan does no such thing in the book. And so the 163 leaders are put to death and point to each other, which mirrors the 163 children pointing the way to Meereen. Interestingly, in the book, Dany then observes the city, and our author essentially lists all of the problems that will plague Dany in the future. First, the Unsullied deal with resistors, then the death of the Wise Masters is detailed, then Myrrhyn's cultural symbols are destroyed, then she considers the faithfulness of her sellsword companies, then she thinks about her marriage prospects, then she hears about crime, then about flies spreading disease, then about the tension between Yunkai and Astapor and a possible invasion from Volantis. Then there's the question of a return to slavery and the exile of Jorah, then her attraction to Daario, then her dragons, then her sex dreams, then her dreams of a red door, then she gazes out at the Temple of the Graces. It's a lot of story, and George R. R. Martin admitted that the reason for his big delay in the release of the fifth book was the complexity of the Slaver's Bay story. His ambitious, perhaps overly ambitious vision essentially began here, and the show has cut nearly all of it. Next we get an extra scene with Jaime continuing his training with Bronn, and then Bronn convinces Jaime to go visit Tyrion. And Jaime talks with Tyrion about how he can't break him out of prison. Now this is actually a pretty big departure from the book. In the book, Jaime arrives back in King's Landing and then, quite strikingly, avoids Tyrion. He doesn't attend Tyrion's trial, he doesn't attend Tyrion's trial by battle, and quite curiously, no one tells Tyrion that Jaime is back in town and safe. Not his Uncle Kevin, not Podrick, not Bronn, not Oberyn. Tyrion is absolutely left in the dark, and he even thinks about how he wants Jaime back in town to defend him in a trial by combat. This situation shows that all of Tyrion's friends cannot be trusted, even Podrick Payne. Next we're back with Sansa and Littlefinger talking about the conspiracy to kill Joffrey. Now here in the show, Sansa begins piecing things together and even guesses some of Littlefinger's moves. In the book, Sansa is much, much more clueless. So in the book, Sansa is actually brought first to Littlefinger's family home in the Fingers, which is a pretty dismal place, and Sansa meets another of Littlefinger's cronies, Oswell Kettleblack. Oswell has 3 sons who are each in positions in King's Landing, one even in the Kingsguard. And so Sansa at first thinks that perhaps the Kettleblacks were involved in the murder. But quite strangely, Littlefinger claims no, which makes this reveal quite puzzling. The Kettleblack brothers being Littlefinger's cronies doesn't actually affect anything. So in the book, the murder, according to Littlefinger, was planned by the Queen of Thorns, all because she feared Margaery would suffer abuse from Joffrey, and Loras, being close by as a Kingsguard, would become a Kingslayer. And so somehow the QOT apparently knew Sansa's hairnet had poison in it, and she removed the stone from it, and some point got that poison into Joffrey's wine. However, this explanation has some serious problems with it. Keep in mind, Littlefinger is the one that brokered the Margaery-Joffrey marriage in the first place, and he claims he came into town praising Joffrey. He had his cronies spread rumors that Joffrey was a little piece of shit. Okay, if that were the case, why would the Queen of Thorns involve Littlefinger? Why would she go to the man who just praised Joffrey and who apparently works for the Lannisters? How would one even breach the subject of regicide? The story as Littlefinger presents it doesn't make much sense. Additionally, it was the Tyrells who insisted that Loras be on the Kingsguard, but the fear of Loras kingslaying was a big reason for needing to kill Joffrey. So why put him on the Kingsguard if that was going to be a problem in the first place? So there definitely seems to be some unanswered questions when it comes to Joffrey's death in the book, and Littlefinger doesn't seem to be telling the whole story. However, here in the show, things are simplified a bit, and we actually get this extra scene of the Queen of Thorns actually confessing to Margaery that she was the murderer. Here in the show, the Queen of Thorns also tells a bizarre story to her granddaughter about how she was betrothed to a Targaryen but wanted to marry Luther Tyrell. Luther was going to propose to Alina's sister, so Alina fucked Luther's brains out and got him to want her instead. Now in the book, Olenna was betrothed to a Targaryen and did eventually marry Luther Tyrell. However, the Targaryen she was betrothed to was likely gay, and Luther Tyrell was betrothed to another Targaryen who suddenly married her brother. And so Olenna and Luther married each other after failing to marry their Targaryens. Next we get an extra scene at the wall with Jon training new recruits, and the show-only character of Locke has arrived and turns out to be an excellent fighter. Meanwhile, Alliser Thorne and Janos Slynt worry about Jon Snow's growing popularity. Again, in the book, the wildling attack on the wall is almost immediately after Jon's escape from the wildlings and his return. It's quite a panicked time in the book, but here in the show, the Night's Watch seems to have loads of downtime. And then we get an extra scene with Cersei angry at Jaime for making an oath to Catelyn Stark about protecting Sansa. In the book, Cersei is quite angry at Jaime, but it's for not believing that Tyrion killed Joffrey. And we don't have any evidence that Cersei even knew about Jaime's oath. And then we get an extra scene with Margaery visiting Tommen at night to win over his affections. Margaery does in fact make efforts to win over Tommen in the book, but this is largely done after they're married. We get a quick cameo from Sir Pounce, Tommen's cat. In the book, Margaery actually gives Sir Pounce to Tommen. Next we have Jaime presenting Brienne with the sword Oathkeeper and tells her to go protect Sansa. Of course, Oathkeeper is ice reforged, and in both book and show, Jaime explains that it's fitting that Ned Stark's steel is being used to protect Sansa. In the book, this all goes a bit further, in that Brienne borrows a shield from Jaime that he got at Harrenhal with the sigil of House Lawston on it. A giant bat. House Lawston is famous for red-haired Mad Danelle Lawston, and the Lawstons likely transitioned into becoming House Went. House Went of Harrenhal also using bats as their sigil. House Went happens to be Sansa's mother's house, and in the book at various points, Sansa is associated with a bat. Once she's even called a half-wolf, half-bat. Anyway, Brienne gets the shield repainted with the sigil of Sir Duncan the Tall, but it's of note that Brienne is walking around the kingdom looking for a hidden Sansa with a hidden patrilineal Stark sword of Winterfell and a hidden matrilineal Lawston shield of Harrenhal. Of course, Brienne and Jaime really become connected at the Harrenhal bathhouse where Mad Danelle Lawston used to bathe in blood, and to bring everything full circle, Sansa actually hides as Elaine Stone, the daughter of Littlefinger, the Lord of Harrenhal. If Littlefinger died, she could actually inherit the place. Now here in the show, Jaime gives Brienne Podrick Payne as a squire, reasoning that he isn't safe in King's Landing because of his connection to Tyrion. In the book, Podrick is a bit more suspicious. Back in the first book, Kevan Lannister sent Pod to squire for Tyrion. or so Pod claims. Pod acts the faithful squire, even saving Tyrion's life at the Blackwater, until Tyrion's imprisonment. Pod was then taken into custody by Tywin, and then released at some point, but then he starts acting suspicious as he often wouldn't return very hastily to Tyrion after Tyrion gave him tasks, and as I said before, he kept from Tyrion the fact that Jaime was alive and in King's Landing. Now, perhaps Pod was just late and didn't want Tyrion to choose a one-handed knight, but it is suspicious. Anyway, in the book, Pod then follows Brienne to see if she will lead him to Tyrion, but he's caught following her, and then becomes her squire. Next we get an extra scene of Sam worrying about Gilly at Molestown, especially with the wildlings south of the Wall. Again, in the book, Sam and Gilly have not made it back to Castle Black yet. Now here in the show we find out that Sam told Jon that Bran is alive. This is a pretty big deal politically, as Bran is king in the north. In the book, Sam promises Bran to keep this a secret, and he does. Now the show then delves off into this bizarre show-only subplot about the mutineers at Craster's Keep. Under the guise of protecting intel about the Wall, but really because Jon is too popular, Alliser Thorne allows Jon and any volunteers to head north of the Wall to clear out the mutineers at Craster's Keep. And here Jon convinces his friends, including Locke, to come. And so next we come to the mutineers. Now in the book we don't have much visibility on the mutineers or what happened to them after Sam leaves Craster's Keep. At some point, 5 of them start following Bran's crew, and Cold Hands kills them. Cold Hands then secretly feeds the mutineers' flesh to Bran's posse. At this point in our story, we have no idea what happened to the rest of the mutineers or Craster's wives. Here in the show, Carl seems to be leading the mutineers, and they're filling their days with raping, feasting, and getting in arguments with each other. But then one more of Craster's sons is born, and he needs to be given to the White Walkers. So Rast is then sent off to offer the baby, and with some regrets, leaves him in the woods. Now Rast is also tasked with feeding Ghost. We last saw Ghost in episode 3.3, when he didn't follow Sam into Craster's Keep. So props to the mutineers for being able to capture a direwolf, though I'm not sure why they're wasting food on him. In the book, Jon sends Ghost off a little before he climbs the wall, to have no big adventure that we know of. Anyway, water freezes really quickly, which scares Rast, and he runs back inside. Meanwhile, it turns out Bran is close enough to Craster's Keep to hear that baby crying. So Bran's skin changes Summer and goes in to investigate. And then we learn how the mutineers captured Ghost. With a snare, and Summer seems to be captured the same way. So the next day Bran's crew goes in to find Summer, and soon they're captured as well. Carl figures out pretty quickly that Bran is highborn, and then convinces Bran into talking by threatening Mira. Nothing remotely similar to the Craster's Keep plot happens in the book at all. And finally, we are treated to an extra scene where a White Walker has taken the baby and is bringing it north. And somehow he's able to make this baby survive all the way up to the land of Always Winter. I imagine this scene is meant to mirror in some respect Ned riding with Lyanna's baby after the events at the Tower of Joy. Anyway, the baby is brought before the Night's King, and we see that Bran's vision about the Night's King was actually his reflection from his perspective. Now in the book, we still don't know how the others are created. That is, whether they are birthed or turned. Here in the show, it seems there are only male White Walkers who turn babies. Additionally, the White Walkers seem to have this leader, the Night's King. However, in the book we don't know if the others have a leader, and there's been at least one female other, at least in legend. She married a man named the Night's King, who was not the leader of the White Walkers, but the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who wanted to be king at the Wall. The Wildlings and the Northerners teamed up to defeat him, and then they destroyed all records of him, though Old Nan thinks he was a Stark, and that perhaps his name was Brandon. And that's all for episode 4.4. See you in episode 4.5.